Hello, everyone. Analyze This Views from Home and Abroad, a Nigerian history podcast, co hosted by me, Adebola Anoche, with the assistance of our scriptwriter and research assistant, Osas. So, this episode or this podcast in general is a unique initiative to explore Nigerian history from diverse local and global perspectives. Join us for insightful analysis and engaging conversations that uncovers the stories shaping our understanding of the past and present. Now, for today's topic. So, this is our fifth episode, and we're excited to have made it this far. Yay! It
Yeah,
hasn't been
guys.
easy, but the process and the results have made us proud, right?
Yeah, it has. We're still a work in progress, but we're excited about the work we are doing, and we need your help to make our work better. So if you're an OG listener or this is your first time being a listener to this podcast, you are all very much welcome. We would like to hear from you on how to make this podcast the number one Nigerian history podcast in the country. So please, we are opening up our social media and our emails, and you can reach out to us on social media at analyze this underscore the pod on Instagram or analyze these views from home and abroad on Facebook. You can also send us an email at analyzethisthepod at gmail.com. Um, the analyze in the email will be with Z. But we would also put um, our social media platforms and our email on the link. For those of you who have access to the link, we'll also post the link on our social media platform. And then you can reach out to us and, forward your thoughts. Let's see how we can make the work better.
Okay, so that being said, let's dive right into the discussion for today. But
Yeah.
before we even do that, today is Children's Day.
Yeah.
We're recording. This is the 27th of May, and so happy Children's Day
Yes.
to all of us. We're all
Yeah.
children.
Yeah. For those of our listeners who are not from Nigeria, I don't know if it's a Nigerian holiday, but technically it applies to only children. Because I remember when I was in uni and we wanted to stay home on Children's Day, and they were like, "You guys are not kids, come to school." But yeah, this is May 27th. Is a day that we celebrate children in this country. Shout out to all the children out there. We are wishing you. Shout out to my sisters, by the way, my little sisters. Um, Wishing you guys an amazing day. I'm sorry I did not call, but I'll call you guys later.
Well, we're moving forward from the history in the making. So let's dive into the main issue for today, which is the third part of our short trilogy on pre-colonial Nigerian architecture. So, over the past two episodes, we've discussed the history behind the spaces that define us, paying respect to the architecture of the past, notably the Benin Walls, and how we can embrace pre colonial techniques to ensure more sustainable modern architecture.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, guys, if you've not listened to those episodes, please check it out so that you can follow the conversation.
In our third episode with Dr. Q, we talked briefly about the walls of Zaria and their significance with regards to architecture and sustainable design. Today, we will be taking that conversation a little further as we discuss not just the architecture of the historic walls, but also the stories behind these walls that make them so historically significant in the first place.
Yeah. So, quick story. Basically, for those of us who grew up in the Nigerian educational system, you will know that from JS1 to JS3, students are mandated to study at least one of the three major languages in Nigeria. And for those of you who are not from Nigeria, those languages are Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa. So while you might find that very few schools offer lessons in all three languages, it's more common to have just one of those languages being taught. And the region determines the language which is being taught. So you have like Yoruba in the west, Igbo in the east, and Hausa in what is considered the north.
So, yeah, that makes sense, right? So, for our non Nigerian listeners, right? I'm Nigerian. We're all Nigerian here. Yeah. Yorubas are predominantly located in the west, Igbos in the east, and Hausas in the north. But where are we going with this?
Yeah, so
Noche, where
bear
are
with
we
me. Bear with me. Just let's follow the story. So one crazy thing about Nigeria is that this north, west, and east categorization overshadows a lot of the minorities in the middle belt, and also minorities down south as well. Especially those for the middle belt, especially those who are like non-Hausa, but are often categorized as such because they fall under a broad northern umbrella. So I think we've spoken about this before on the podcast, but like a place like the middle belt of Nigeria, a place like Plateau State, for example, has up to 54 tribes. You understand? But more often than not, they are categorized as just Hausa people, especially from people who are down south and just in general. So this happens, like we said, like a lot in Nigeria. So students like me, like I schooled in the middle belt, or what is considered the north of Nigeria, studied Hausa as our mandatory Nigerian language. So although a lot of the people around this area speak Hausa normally, the Hausa that was taught in the school was what people call the core northern Hausa, like the OG Hausa, which is like the dialect of Hausa that is spoken in places like Sokoto, which is far up north, which is more technical and some people would argue more authentic Hausa. So unlike the watered down Hausa that is spoken around the areas where we grew up in the Middle Belt. So we had teachers who did their best to teach us, but when it came to writing what we referred to as the Almighty Junior WAEC, um, our knowledge of this technical language which we had been learning for years, was usually tested, and a lot of us didn't do as well. So people who write the exams, you knew that almost the best that you can get is a C in that exam. So it was funny that you could, before writing the exam, you know that you already have an idea of what your grade was. So a lot of people don't even bother with writing these exams or studying for these exams rather because they already kind of know what the score was going to be.
So let me bring us to the US. Now, this is generally speaking because this varies depending on the state you're residing. So So they're different. Okay, so in secondary school, primary school, depending, right? Usually we have like Latin, French, Spanish, Italian, like
Okay.
Greek are available. So you choose whichever one you want. It
Okay.
depends on what's available. So and then or either sometimes depending on the language or heritage of the parents of that child, that will determine whether they go to like private language schools or online schools for them.
Okay.
That's how they
Okay.
learn the language. Okay, so now bringing it back to heritage and why we're doing this because we're Nigerians here. So usually immigrants here in general, what we do is that we pass down our language and culture, which everybody does in the diaspora. We try to do this. Immigrants, we don't do this. So there are ways we do this. Sometimes we read books. We enroll in language schools, as I mentioned earlier, and you know, even that can be in person or online. Or sometimes we do like heritage or festivals here, or maybe engaging in conversations in the household. But
Okay.
bringing it back to myself, I just remember like speaking to my parents and family friends, and especially when visitors come to us, they'll bring the Yoruba language films, CDs to watch, and then when
Wait.
and you they watch it here, so we'll all of us will watch it with them, and during their visit because they bring it here to watch, or this is back in the day when they had CDs, or sometimes they'll be on YouTube and they'll watch Yoruba films. So this is how we learned it, right? This is how we learned
Okay.
it. So there are various ways everybody has been exposed. And yeah, so basically they do their best. Our parents, they do their best to kind of instill some sense of identity, for
Yeah.
us.
I think that's something that a lot of Nigerians who grow up in the diaspora are very um intentional about compared to a lot of us who grow up here in Nigeria. But it's something that we should emulate. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. A lot of us who they taught those languages in school didn't actually learn these languages.
Mm,
That's just the truth. We just
mm,
maybe learned what was enough for us to try and pass the exams.
mm.
Um, but so the method of transferring languages in the home, I think, is one of the better ways of being able to transfer one's language to the next generation. So our lack of understanding of the language aside, it didn't matter if you understood the watered down Hausa or the authentic Hausa, or if you had no idea of the language at all. One thing every student had to know and will honestly never forget is the legend of Bayajida, the father of both the Hausa Bakwe and the Banza Bakwe. I remember my Hausa teacher. I don't remember much about learning Hausa in school, but I remember the story told to me by my Hausa teacher, Mr. Sanda, about the great legend who is Bayajida.
Hmm, that's interesting. So, okay, so we've looked at Nigeria's regionalism, educational curriculum, looked at also those in the diaspora like myself, and also the poor
Yeah,
grades
I
associated.
failed Hausa when
Oh,
I
you feel
was I failed.
and the poor grades or the systems, that are there, which cause a disadvantage to kids, yeah. And anyway, so now we look at Bayajida. But remember, we are here because the Walls of Zaria. So, at what point does this story come together?
Okay, so if we're speaking chronologically, it actually takes centuries for this story to come together because there's no Zaria without Bayajida, essentially. So for us to understand the full story and why the walls are such a historic piece of architecture, we must pay our respect to the legend who laid foundations for their existence in the first place.
So, putting it in less dramatic terms, let's talk about Bayajida, the founding father of the Hausa states, one of which is Zaria Zazao.
Yes. Anyway, think of it like the histories of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin that they taught, you guys there. So Bayajida, we have to put some respect on his name because he's the founding father of, at least 14 states that we have in the country today.
Okay, so I hear you, and let's give honor to whom honor is due. So, with all due respect, kindly tell us in the famous story behind the legendary founding father.
Oh, yes. So we're trying to give a genealogical basis of how Zaria was formed. Do you
Okay,
understand?
okay, I hear you.
Yes. Okay. So according to um, Hausa traditions of origin, Bayajida was the son of Abdullahi, the king of Baghdad, and a Berber migrant to Daura, meaning he was a Berber prince from Baghdad, which at the time was in North Africa, and migrated to Daura in Western Sudan, West Africa. Now, when he arrived in Daura, Bayajida's love story and subsequent rise to power began at a well. In Daura, the beautiful queen, Shawata, and her people were facing a serious water crisis, not because there was lack of water in that environment, but because the only well in the community had been commandeered by a snake named Serki. So, Serki did not allow the citizens fetch water from the well except on Fridays. According to the legend, Bayajida arrived at Daura on a day that wasn't Friday, and he wanted to draw water from the well, but was warned against doing so by the elderly woman who was his host. But he defied her warning and went ahead to fetch his water. And as expected, he encountered Serki, and in typical hero fashion, he killed the snake and cut off its head. Went ahead to fetch his water for the things he needed water for. When the townfolk noticed the dead snake, they were curious to know who had killed the snake. And the old woman spilled the tea. She had the hottest gossip in town, basically. And word got to Queen Shawata, who had promised to marry anyone who was bold enough to kill Serki.
Okay, so she made
Yes,
herself the reward, right?
yes. Essentially, she made herself the reward. So when Bayangida shows up with Serki's head as proof, the story is pretty straightforward from there. You understand. They become a couple and they two get together.
Hmm. Cinderella happily ever after.
Well, it depends because along the line, another woman is added into the narrative, and that's a concubine named Magira.
So, who is Magira and where did she come from?
So we don't have any records to prove that Queen Shawata had fertility issues. However, she gave Magira to Bayajida as a mistress or concubine, and Magira gave birth to a son for the queen. This son was Biram. Now, somewhere down the line, the queen birthed her own son, and this queen's son is named Bao. Bao grows up to have six sons of his own, and his sons, together with his brother Biram, form the Hausa Bakwe faction, basically the legitimate sons of Bayajida, who rule over Daura, Kano, Katsina, Zazo, and Rano. But the story isn't complete because Magira, the mistress, has her own son named Karabgari, who grows up to father an illegitimate generation of Banzabakwes, seven sons that ruled over Nupe, Ilorin, Kebi, Zamfara, Gweri, Jukun, and Yori. Together, the Hausa Bakwe form the Hausa states, and the Banza Bakwe are inadvertently their enemies.
So, can you guys digest everything that was just said? This is this is Nigerian history for us, right? So essentially,
Yeah,
both the legitimate and illegitimate sons grew to be successful states,
yeah,
all competing for authority, resources, and everything in between.
exactly, exactly. So it was a very intense step sibling drama, kind of a Game of Thrones in its own right, because there was a struggle for supremacy, and it was a very,
True,
very real struggle.
hmm, true. But how does the century-long power tussle relate to our topic, the Walls of Zaria? Let's draw the connection here, please.
Yes. So earlier we had mentioned Zazzau as one of the states ruled by the House of Bakwe. That's the legitimate sons. It's important to note that the period being discussed is pre-18th century Hausa land, an era long before the 18th century Usman Danfodio Jihad that had amalgamated all the seven states into one caliphate. So at this point, between the 14th and 18th century, Zaza was ruled by a dynasty of Habe kings called Serkis. So remember the name.
Mm. Habe kings called Serkis.
Yeah.
So, Serki the snake, how
Yes.
does that
So
tie in?
yeah, Serki in Hausa means king. By the way, so we have seven states. The Hausa Bakwe controlled independently but coexist within the same geopolitical ecosystem. Now remember, they are brothers, but each brother is struggling to occupy the most supreme position within their shared ecosystem. So while fighting off attacks from the other seven step siblings, those the Banza Bakwe, this meant that the political landscape of the region between the 14th century and the early 18th centuries was plagued by incessant battles between the Hausa states, especially the Hausa Bakwe. So each state had occasionally enjoyed dominance at one point or the other. However, for most of the 16th century, Zazzau was the strongest and most dominant state in Hausa land. According to the Kano Chronicles, Zazzau was ruled by 60 kings of the Habe dynasty before the 1804 Fulani conquest and 50 thereafter. So basically, these Hausa Bakwe states coexisted within the same ecosystem, and there was a lot of infighting amongst themselves for supremacy, as well as fighting their step siblings, the Banza Bakwe, for supremacy as well.
Hmm. Interesting stuff. So, and for this episode, we focus on the 16th century Zazao, the zenith of this powerful state ruled by the sovereign Habe kings and eventually the queen who made Zazao a force to be reckoned with.
The woman of the hour is none other than Queen Amina, the warrior queen of Zazzau, as some people refer to it as Zaria. Amina's rise to power within a highly patriarchal society is a topic for another day, which I hope we will get to cover on the podcast. But for this episode, we are considering a major achievement of her reign, which is the Wall of Zaria.
Mm. So earlier we had explained the tension that existed within Hausa states during this period due to the struggle of supremacy. As a result of this tension, Queen Amina's reign was characterized by 34 years of uninterrupted warfare. Think of the intensity of President Zelensky's tenure as Ukrainian president extended for 34 years.
Yeah,
Can you
that would be
imagine?
wild and basically overwhelming for any leader.
So I agree. And perhaps Queen Amina did too, which was why she didn't sit back and allow her state to be at the receiving end of attacks from all sides. She was almost always on the offensive, expanding the frontiers of her territories far beyond their limited boundaries. Thanks to her wars, made Zaria a great center for trans-Saharan trade. A major trade commodity in this era was slaves, and Zaria dis- distinguished itself as the Lord of Slaves, responsible for acquiring and distributing slaves in Hausa land. Under Queen Amina's reign, Zaria established its economic dominance in Hausa land, attracting merchants from the seven states and beyond.
Yeah, so Amina was truly the boss lady in every way. Because beyond economic growth, Amina also spearheaded Zaria's military expansion. And by fighting and winning battles, she conquered more and more territory, which she absorbed into her rapidly growing state. Her military career began early, accompanying her father Bakwa on his military expeditions to the point where he sent her out on campaigns without him. And after his death in 1576, her military prowess earned her the throne. Amina was unusually powerful and, a phenomenal queen that Sultan Bello of Sokoto wrote of her. Strange things have happened in the history of seven Hausa states, and the most strange of these is the extent of the possessions which God gave to Aminatu, daughter of the ruler of Zazzau. She waged war in the Hausa lands and took them all, so that the men of Katsina and the men of Kanu brought her tribute. She made war in Bauchi and against the other towns of the south and the southwest, so that her possessions stretched down to the shores of the sea. Zaria, under Queen Amina, conquered all the towns as far as Kwara and Nupe, which all paid tribute to her. The Sultan Nupe, for instance, sent 40 eunuchs and 10,000 colonels to her. Her conquest lasted a span of over 34 years, like we said, and um she was praised by her people for being a woman who was as capable as a man. In essence, in her time, the boundaries of Zaria extended to the lands along the Niger and Benue rivers, Kano, Katsina, Kefi, Nasarawa, which is a very large portion of land. And in order to keep the enemies out and protect her own better, Amina facilitated the construction of the walls of Zaria, popularly described as Gamwar Amina.
So finally, we have arrived at the walls. Ha! Aren't you
Yeah.
guys? Aren't you guys? Okay now.
You can say that again. It's been a journey, I guess, but I hope that the knowledge and the historical background that we have provided for our audience will help them basically better appreciate this architectural wonder.
I agree. Like you had said, the walls served as protection for every large expanse of land which Queen Amina had conquered and assimilated into Zazzau. To the west, Zara enclosed regions as far as the Kufena Hill and village and several other villages in all directions. She is said to have built a walled camp wherever she traveled to. Thus, in many parts of Hausa land, ancient town walls are called Ganwar Amina walls, even though they are not necessarily built by her.
Yeah, so if you've been following attentively, you will notice that we have been using the names Zazao and Zaria interchangeably to describe the same place. This is because, as we established, Zazao is the original name of the kingdom established by one of the seven sons of Bayajida and ruled by the Habe dynasty of Selkis, including Queen Amina. However, as Zazao expanded, and Bakwa, who was Amina's father, moved its capital from Turunku to Kufena and then to Zaria in 1536. Interesting fact, Zaria is actually Amina's younger sister's name, so the city was named after her. There are some theories that claim that Zaria died in battle, which is a narrative that was depicted in the 2021 movie Amina, which a lot of us might have seen. But we haven't corroborated that yet. Other theories say Bakwan named it after Zaria. What is important is that Zaria is the capital city of Zazzau Kingdom, which post 18th century jihad became the Zazzau Emirates. However, Zaria's situation is more like the way Dubai, a lot of people just refer to the UAE as Dubai, or their idea of where that place is called. They just call it Dubai, not knowing that the country itself it's called the UAE. So the name Dubai is more popular than the country UAE itself.
Yeah, that's actually very true. Like, just to chime in here, like as Noche was saying. So yeah, Dubai is well known. Even Abu Dhabi is also well known, but we forget that there are
Exactly.
seven Emirates that we're
Yeah.
not talking about. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think because like Dubai is known to be, very metropolitan and like what
Exactly.
to be very like business and luxury shopping like centered, tourist
Yeah.
centered. While like Abu Dhabi is the capital of UAE, but it's
Yeah.
more like, it's like basically it's the Federal National Council, and yeah, it's quite, yeah. So that's just to kind of give you guys a snippet there. So
Yeah.
so this makes sense. The capital became so famous that it became synonymous with the kingdom. Like we made the similarities with Dubai, Abu Dhabi, UAE.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So Zaria is the headquarters of the Zazzau Emirate, which today comprises of most parts of northern and central zones of Kaduna State, including the capital.
According to a Daily Trust article, when Bakwa Turunku and his entourage arrived the place called Zaria today, he decided to stay there and build a tent under an oak tree, Gao, instead of moving to Kufena, where his daughter Zaria was, which is about 12 kilometers away. Turunku later built a house close to the oak tree for the fact that that oak tree are specially blessed. Members of Turunku's entourage also got separate pieces of land to develop their residences within the premises of the leader's house or precinct of their leader's house. His daughter Zaria tasked expert builders to build a wall around Bakwa settlement, which he eventually named after her, Zaria. So it was from here that the ancient city expanded to the boundaries of Niger-Benue confluence. Therefore, the ancient walls and gates of Zaria have their roots from the house built by Turunku in the middle of the place known as Zaria today. So essentially, the walls were a project started by Bakwa and completed by his daughter Amina.
Yes, so like the walls of Benin built centuries earlier, the walls of Zaria also had the moat style of architecture. If you've listened to our previous episode, we discussed what the moat style of architecture was. And this was basically to prevent the horses of the enemy to access the walls. The wall is said to have been about 20 kilometers long, 7 meters wide, and 8 meters deep. The architectural design of the ancient wall of Zaria made provisions for gates sited at some strategic locations. The distance between one gate and another is about 3 kilometers. These gates, Kofan Jatau, Kofan Galadima, Kofan Doka, Kofan Gayan, Kofan Kona, Kofan Kano, Kofan Kibo, and Kofan Koyambana, each of these gates had their specific significance. For instance, Kofan Doka, which was originally Kofan Zozo, was renamed Kofan Doka because it was the entry point through which the native police Yandoka passed through whenever they were going in or returning from training. Um, Kofa and Koyambana was the entry point to the forest where the Queen Amina captured most of the slaves that were brought into Zaria. Kofa and Kona was the entry point for travelers from Adamawa, Gombe, Bauchi. Kofa Jato was named after a Habe king, Serki Jato, during whose reign that gate was constructed. Thankfully, these gates are still standing tall today as entry points into Zaria city, although much work still needs to be done to reinforce them. They are a monument to the ancient city of Zaria.
So I guess we can say that each wall has its own significance or purpose during the
Yeah.
time of a king or or whatnot. So sadly, as in the case of Benin, the same cannot be said about the walls, which are dilapidated and practically non-existent today. The walls were built using traditional Hausa techniques, and like any architecture, culture is reflected in Hausa architecture too. From the traditional building materials such as mud, grass, and animal feces. So the design patterns on the walls, the walls of Zaria, are 100% indigenous technique.
Okay, that's interesting. Animal feces. What an interesting choice of building material.
Of course, yeah. Essentially, the building material is a mixture of wet earth, dried animal feces, and sometimes grass or reed pieces, included for strength. Animal excrements because it ensures a good bounding, like animal sapphire or adhesive or glue. So while the grass provides it with good strength, according to Oediro 1994, an animal feces acts like a thermal insulation and is the best natural disinfectant. This material makes the home environmental, or in this case, the walls of Zaria more sustainable, according to Curtis 2016.
Yeah, so that's interesting to know. So all of this was important because the soil in this area is loose and less plastic in nature, unlike the soil in the southern part of Nigeria, e.g., Benin, like which we have seen. Therefore, it becomes essential to add grass binders, cow dung, and locust bean pods to the mixture before being molded to improve the plasticity of the mud, making it very affordable and sustainable. This information we got from Zango 2020, 2014. Um, our emphasis is on sustainability in this series. So knowing that despite Zaria's access to foreign materials at the time, because they were a big empire, um, they and being a commercial city as it was at the peak of the trans-Saharan trade, the people still chose to depend on locally sourced materials for sustainability, and that is something we have tried to echo on this short series that we have been doing.
I agree. They were sustainable in their design and also very intentional because even before they commenced building, they planned for 3 years the amount of labor, materials, and all resources needed to build the wall, and then spent 5 years building the wall. So the 20-kilometer long wall of Zaria was such an excellent edifice that it became a temple for fortifications across Hausa land in states like Kano.
Yeah, so that makes sense because you recall how we said that this was an era where there was intense and a lot of battles and fighting for power among the Hausa states. So each state was constantly introducing innovations to beef up their defense and security. These fortified cities actually worked in curbing insecurities and attacks in pre-colonial Hausa land. So much so that some modern scholars are actually advocating for a return to this ancient form of architecture and town planning to save the same parts of Hausa land now, which is now part of northern Nigeria that has been victims of incessant attacks by terrorists and bandits today.
Well, of what use is history to us if we cannot learn a lesson or two from it? So, what scholars like Megari and others are saying is that this strategy of fortification proved effective in protecting their people and property then. Therefore, building defensive walls or fortifications around towns and cities that are facing acute security challenges today can enable the government and community members to protect their residents. The use of defensive walls will make the use of different mass surveillance tactics much easier because the areas are enclosed, hence, patrol, searching, and arrest of criminals will be easier. And instead of spending huge amounts on the procurement of weapons by the federal government of Nigeria, the government should erect a build a fence that make criminal investigation more effective, hence combat crime and criminals. That's actually interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, interesting is the word. So why we would leave this debate, for security experts to decide. However, I think ultimately protection of the lives of the people in northern Nigeria and Nigeria as a whole lies squarely on the shoulders of the government, who have the capability to do so, but are not doing it to the best of their ability. And I will say that with some trepidation. The government has to do a lot better. Erecting walls won't be enough because, again, these walls take years to build. And if the process of building them are being sabotaged by the same people who we are trying to keep out, and then it's counterproductive at the end of the day. The protection of lives of individuals in northern Nigeria and Nigeria as a whole lies squarely on the government as far as I am concerned. And the government needs to do better. But that's my
Mm.
opinion.
You know, I think we should also address the foundation of this insecurity issue. Why are people um, criminals? Why do people, go ahead and become criminals? Like, what exactly is the root cause? Why don't we, if
I
we're this? if we address root
Yeah,
causes, that can also help out, as
yeah,
well.
but I'm of a different opinion. A lot of people think
Mhm,
because there's poverty, there's
mhm, mhm.
insecurity, there's poverty, there's hunger in the land, and all of those things give people a reason to be involved in insecurity. I would argue that the most important thing is a lack of rule of law. There are no consequences
Mm.
for bad behavior in this country. And that is the biggest problem as far as I'm concerned. People are incentivized to do the wrong thing because first there is hunger and poverty in the land. And they know that there is a very high chance that they will get away with it. If we incentivize good behavior and punish bad behavior in this country, people will not do the wrong thing. If the government is effective in clearing out as they should be and as they are capable, because I believe our government is capable. Um, so if the government is effective and in their capability in ensuring the safety of people and punishing those who do the wrong thing instead of rehabilitating them, you understand, then there will be less incentives for people to join these groups in the first place. Uh, So
So, that being said, the Wall of Zaria served its purpose in its own time, even if it may not fit into our modern urban and security architecture today. It still has a great purpose to play as a historical monument and a tourist attraction in Kaduna State. Like we saw in our last episode, there are a few people who haven't given up on our ancient walls. So we have MOA, MOWAA in Benin, and the Restoration Project in Zaria. Benna Associates, meaning BENNA, Benna Associates, is a Zaria based architectural and development firm that has proposed and is working on the restoration of Zaria City Wall project to restore the broken fragments of the wall and its 8 gates.
yeah, so a very commendable effort, and we wish them the very best on this. You can check their website, https semicolon double forward slash Benna hyphen associates.com forward slash to come to know more about the project and how you can support them. And it's important that we understand that a lot of these projects need support, both monetary support if you can, as well as on social media platforms. If you know ways that you can help, just visit their website and there are ways that you can support them. And so that we can also hold them accountable to their vision. We at on this podcast at Analyze This, our team will definitely be part of the accountability team and as well as their publicity gang. Because we can't wait to see the wonders that they come up with.
Yeah, so we hope it will be something Sarki Bakwa, Queen Amina, and all those who spent 5 long years working on this wall will be proud of. We also look forward to seeing locally sourced materials and indigenous Hausa techniques at the core of this project.
Exactly, exactly. So architects like Dr. Q will be proud to see the 21st century sustainability on display.
Well, that's all we have for now. We hope you've enjoyed learning about pre-colonial Nigerian architecture because we too have enjoyed the learning process as well. If you haven't listened to our previous episodes, please go back and listen. We would love to hear your feedback. Also, if there is an area or topic, or you feel like there are gaps in history, in Nigerian history, you would like us to cover, slide in our DMs and let us know. Remember, you can find us on Instagram at analyze this underscore the pod, on Facebook at analyze this views from home and abroad, or send us an email at analyze this the pod at gmail.com. So analyze with a Z.
Yeah. So it's the other analyze for the Instagram and the Facebook is S, but for the email it's Z. So you can also comment on all our platforms on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, AfriPods, and Amazon. And do not forget to like, share, and subscribe so more people can have access to us and we can be in their ears singing our Nigerian history. As always, it was a pleasure to bring this podcast to you guys. I am Nochi, and I'm saying thank you very much and see you next month.
Bye.